welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest here in Austin, Texas, and I've enjoyed nearly 50 years of sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and for that, I am extremely grateful. I've also worked in the addiction treatment field for most of my life, and I guess my job there was to help people who maybe couldn't get sobriety or recovery through just coming into the doors of AA or NA or CA or OA or whatever might the addiction might be. Help them access that, and I always figured that was really my job. And since I've retired, it's kind of still my job, but maybe to do it in a freer manner. And that's what these podcasts are an attempt to be. I found that the history of AA, going deeper into that, opens that door wider. I also found that exploring the spirituality of the program in some depths opens the door for many people. So you never know which door it is people are going to come through, and that's what I'm trying to do in these podcasts, open that up for people in a way that I hope is going to be helpful. And perhaps one of the most helpful things that I know I discovered along the journey was a thing called two-way prayer, and that was the form of prayer and meditation. And most of us have a difficult time with that in recovery. And so I've explored that. We have a website on that and encourage you to visit it. It'll explain the process. Attend one of our workshops. I try to do one every couple of months, and that schedule is on the website, or you can write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to send you the list of upcoming workshops that you might be able to attend. I guess the last thing I did want to do is thank those of you who's responded to our request for donations. We want to extend our work out to YouTube. Hired a couple of people to help us do that. So no charge for these. There never will be, but and I make no money from it. But we do have expenses, and those who've helped with contributions are really helping us to get the message out. Okay, business is out of the way. The last series we did here was on the book Transformation by Robert Johnson. Had a lot of nice comments coming in from people who really benefited from that, found it very helpful in introducing some of the ideas of Carl Jung. We know that Jung played an important role in the beginnings of AA, and he continues to, I think, play an important role in helping people, well, how would I say it, kind of join together spirituality with psychology in a manner that works for people today. So Jung takes spirituality very seriously and incorporated it into the brand of psychology that he developed over the years. So, but one of the things about Jung is he's not an easy read. Sometimes a lot of Latin and difficulty people have. I did in approaching his work. And so if we can find other authors who can introduce us to that, some of his ideas, it's extremely helpful. I think that's exactly where Robert Johnson comes in. If I'm asked, how can I begin kind of dipping my toe into Jungian waters, Robert Johnson is the author that I recommend for people. So anyway, last series, we did Transformation, a study of consciousness, the evolution of consciousness, as Robert Johnson presented it. And I was struck in the last episode we did in part 2 of Faust, where the scene of the play opens and there's mining for gold going on. It's sort of an alchemist's laboratory, and they're trying to extract gold from rocks and not being very successful. And that was sort of a metaphor for a book, another book by Robert Johnson that I think you'll enjoy. It's titled Inner Gold. And what I want to do with this is Johnson's a wonderful writer, and I think he would speak to you better than I will. So in approaching this book, what I thought I would do is a lot more reading, a lot more quotations from Johnson to give you a taste, a flavor of his writing style. And then I would encourage you to get the book, and it's wonderful for use in your quiet time in the mornings to read some recovery literature. And this is a very, very helpful piece. At least I found it so, and my hope is that you will as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, title, Inner Gold, and we'll put a link to it in the program notes. Johnson starts off saying this: inner gold is the highest value in the human psyche. It is our soul, the self, capital S, the innermost part of our being. It is us at our best, our 24-karat gift to ourselves. Everyone has inner gold. It isn't created, but it does have to be discovered. When I speak about gold this way, I am also speaking about God. Now, that's his first paragraph. And, the big book says that the great reality is within, probably one of the most important sentences in the book. And what Johnson is doing here in this short little book, it's well under 100 pages, is saying that within us exists this great reality. And the most important thing we can do in our lives, and certainly the most important thing we can do in recovery, is to discover, to uncover this inner reality that we have a hard time accessing today. So that's sort of the premise. Johnson says, when we awaken to a new possibility in our lives, we often see it first in another person. A part of us that has been hidden is about to emerge, but it doesn't go in a straight line from our unconscious to becoming conscious. It travels by way of an intermediary, a host. We project our gold onto someone, and suddenly we're consumed with that person. The first inkling of this is when the other person appears to be so luminous that he or she glows in the dark. That's a sure sign that something is changing in us, and we are projecting our gold onto the other person. When we observe the things we attribute to the other person, we see our own depth and meaning. Our gold goes first from us to them. Eventually, it will come back to us. Projecting our inner gold offers us the best chance for an advance in consciousness. So what Johnson is saying here is he's describing the psychological characteristic of projection, how it is part of our human tendency to project onto others things that are going on within ourselves. And if we can glimpse that in the other person, then we know that it exists in us. Spiritual axiom: anytime I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. If you are disturbing me, it's probably not because what you're doing, it's because something that's going on in me that I have now projected onto you. And if I can project it onto you, I've gotten rid of a hot potato. It's out there because I'm not ready or willing to deal with it. So you can look at it in a negative way like that, or you can look at it in a positive way. When someone shows up and they shine. I remember I was in Atlanta, about 5 years sober, and I was at a conference, and Chuck Chamberlain was the speaker. New Pair of Glasses, author of that little booklet. Probably some of you are familiar with that. If you're not, I'll put that in the show notes because it's a good one. And Chuck was a beacon of light, let us say, in a old timer. And I will never forget, probably 1,000 people in the audience. And that man appeared on the stage to speak, and he glowed. Honest to God, there was an aura around him. It was the first time I'd ever really seen something quite as vivid as that. And what Johnson would say was, listen, yeah, you can see it in him, but you can't see it in you. And so what you've done, Bill, is you projected it onto him, that he holds the qualities that you're not able to yet see within yourself. I still think he probably glows a hell of a lot more than than I do. But that's what Johnson is trying to say here. That's the nature of projection. He has little sub chapters, not even chapters, sections, and I'll call those out because it'll be a subtle shift in where he's moving as he develops these ideas. Next one is called The Medieval Mind. He says, in the Middle Ages, the work of alchemy was to produce gold from base metals. There were charlatans trying to make actual gold, but the best alchemists were those working with the gold of the spirit. Alchemy comes from a time when the medieval mind was at its highest flowering. In medieval times, people did not divide reality into inner and outer, or even acknowledge a difference between the two. For them, inside and outside were the same. That's what we saw in Don Quixote when he was describing simple consciousness in that last series. To accomplish all that we have today, we've had to split the world in two. We couldn't be this competitive with a medieval mind. But the price we pay for our accomplishments is loneliness and an inability to love. When we're in love, we are our beloved. I spent many years trying to help people differentiate between inner and outer. You are you and I am I. Your husband is your husband. We have not yet completed the transition to the modern mind. Many psychological problems are a failure to differentiate between out there and in here, the inner world. Johnson takes a slight detour into the Eastern mind now. According to the teachings of India, the external world is Maya, illusion. It is considered illusory because it is actually within, not out there. We see only the 10,000 things that we project. In ancient China, Lao Tzu dreamed of a butterfly, and for the rest of his life, he didn't know whether he had dreamed the butterfly or the butterfly had dreamed him. In the West, gold is the symbol of the self, capital S, the God image within. While in the East, the symbol of our inner divinity is the diamond. In their interior meanings, they are the same, but the images are different. Diamonds are the hardest matter on earth, unearthly, celestial, and impersonal. Gold is much softer, a matter of relationship. The self, again, capital S, the self as related. And he finishes, he says, I think we're lucky to have gold to cope with. So this is a metaphor that he's going to develop throughout his book, that there is within us this inner gold, this God presence, this great reality within. And if we are in touch with that, in conscious contact with it, if we have made conscious what is unconscious, then we are well on our way to having that spiritual experience, entering that fourth dimension, again, that the big book references. Next subsection, the glow in your eyes. When we see that we have given our spiritual gold to someone to hold for us, there are several ways we might respond. We could go to him or her and say, quote, the meaning of my life has suddenly appeared in the glow in your eyes. May I tell you about it, unquote. This is another way of saying, I have given you my inner gold. Will you carry it for me for a while? But we rarely say and do things that directly. Instead, we stand across the room, turn our back on him or her, and feel totally frightened, stumbling, and carrying on in odd ways. We meet at the coffee pot during the morning break at work and banter with one another, speaking all kinds of nonsense. We joke and laugh, and an animated play goes on. Then, when we head back to work, we feel energized and brightened for the day. It was not the coffee. It was the exchange of inner alchemical gold. When we put our gold onto another person, or they put their gold onto us, deep things are happening at the level of unconscious relationship. And there's tremendous energy that is generated through that encounter. And this is an important fact to hold on to, because I really believe it's one of the things that psychologically we do with our addictions. We put onto them the character of a savior that's going to help us. And the relationship that we then develop with them can be quite pathological, quite personal. You know what I mean? I know for me, alcohol secretly was my best friend. Some people will describe their drug as their lover. It's like I'm in a relationship with this that is giving meaning, purpose, fulfillment to my life that is otherwise devoid of that. And believe me, it gets more and more devoid if we don't find the inner path to this gold. Johnson says the exchange of gold is a mysterious process. It is our gold, but it's too heavy for us, so we need someone else to carry it for a time. That person becomes synonymous with meaning. We follow him with an eagle eye wherever he goes. Her smile can raise us to heavenly heights. Her frown will hurl us to hellish depths. So great is the power of meaning. I want to do a series on Viktor Frankl someday, because his whole philosophy is that meaning and purpose are the one thing that human beings cannot live without. That if we don't find that meaning and purpose in our lives, uh, we're doomed. We're doomed. It must be had above all things else. Hero worship is the next little subsection. This is an interesting development here. Johnson says sometimes the exchange of gold takes the form of hero worship. For a 10-year-old boy, his 12-year-old neighbor is a hero. The 10-year-old wants to imitate him. He walks like him. He wears shoes just like his. He borrows his vocabulary and hangs around him as much as he can. We all know the power of fashion, and especially how fashion runs through a neighborhood of adolescence. The style of shoes, prisoner pants, all those things you've got to have. It's both inspiring and funny to watch somebody hero worship. 2 years later, when the 10-year-old is 12, he has become the characteristics that he projected onto the 12-year-old. He assimilated them back and became them. Now he hero worships a 14-year-old and has a new ladder to climb. Oh, I hope you can relate to that painfully as I do. How, as an adolescent, the older kids are who we want to be. And we're not them yet. And so they carry the gold for us until we reach what they have, and then we put it somewhere else. So this is the nature of the human condition. And that's what Johnson, I think, is so marvelous at doing, helping us see those patterns that are going on in the unconscious mind that we are not aware of and need to be. And his writing has a wonderful way of introducing difficult subjects to us in a way that we can see them and watch ourselves. Good old step 10, hey? He tells a story now, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. And it's about a man, a relative of his by the name of Thor, Thor, Thor. And here's how he starts off. He says, I remember vividly my own early hero worshiping. It was so strong, slowly and painfully. I've drawn those hero worship projections, this placing of my own potential onto others, back to myself, turning gray in the process. I have become what I was hero worshiping. When I was 14, I drove with my grandmother to Spokane, Washington, to attend a family funeral. One of my cousins, a little older than I, had married, and I saw her husband for the first time. Instantly, he became my hero. I was unstable in that period of my life. My feet didn't work well, and I hadn't really entered the masculine world. I'm not greatly endowed in that direction. His name was Thor. He was of Norwegian ancestry, in his early 20s, a big, strong guy, an absolute master of the physical world. That fellow did something so kind and important for me. The day after the funeral, he plucked me out of the family gathering and took me into the woods to go hunting, the first and last hunting I've ever done. He sensed who I was, what I needed, and at what speed to initiate me. He knew I had to be told which end of the gun to point where, and he did it all so well. He was a God man, someone of infinitely high value for me. I was envious and bound to him, almost literally. I placed my feet in his footsteps as he walked through the forest, giddy with his greatness. Suddenly he stopped and said, "Squirrel on a limb over there." 10 or 20 yards away was a squirrel on a pine branch. "All right," he said, and told me exactly what to do. "Line this up with the squirrel. Pull the trigger gently so you don't juggle the gun and lose him out of sight. It'll go bang in your ear. Don't be afraid." I did it, and of course, I thought I missed the squirrel. "Come on," he said, and we went over. And lo and behold, I hadn't missed. There on the ground, under the limb, was a ragged, bloody mess of a squirrel. I was so proud and so horrified at the same time. I learned in a split second what heroism costs you and what it gives you. I had become a big man, but I couldn't stand it. I did not want to shoot squirrels. We went back home, and I was more pleased than unhappy. If you were with us for that series of the evolution of consciousness in the book Transformation, I can't help but reflect back to this is what's happening. That there's a movement from the red-bloodedness, see, which is the incident of the squirrel encounter, of hunting, of the primitive, of participating in that. That's the red-bloodedness that is within us. That then becomes the pale-bloodedness, where it's weak, it's diluted, it's untouchable. I'm lost from it, and so there's the Don Quixote to the Hamlet once again. It's that necessary phase of moving from primitive to civilized, but it comes at a price, and the price is internal. The price is my sense of connectedness to life, to my feet, to the ground, to the earth. You know, I used to sit in the bar till 2:00 in the morning having discussions with the theology teacher. We were both teaching high school at the time, and it was philosophy and theology, and we were both going down the tubes. I can see it now. I could not see it then. Johnson talks now about what for us is step 12. He titles this little subsection, Giving Back. He says, 40 years later, I got a letter from my cousin, Thor's wife. "You must be Bob. My granddaughter brought a book home from her psychology class by Robert Johnson, and I think it must be you." I hadn't seen or heard from her in more than 40 years. We spoke on the phone, and she asked if she could visit for her 60th birthday. What a wonderful time we had. She brought a small entourage of people, among whom was a young Thor, the grandson of my hero. He was the same age I had been when I knew the first Thor. And he was skinny and frightened, the way I'd been, quickly going down in the whirlpool of the modern world. My head was swimming with possibilities. So I entertained young Thor with the story of my first and only hunting trip, talking about his grandfather and the wonderful day he had given me. Unfortunately, the elder Thor had drunk himself to death and was pretty much a failure in his life. My cousin had divorced him, and he had just gone down Skid Row. I didn't like hearing this. He had been my hero. So I told this little guy who hadn't said a word, I owe your grandfather an immense debt, and I transfer that debt to you. I owe you whatever you need from me. The boy latched onto me immediately, and I became his hero. It was a beautiful exchange. This is alchemical gold. You put your own gold onto somebody until you're able to hold it yourself. As a 14-year-old, I couldn't do what Thor could. He was 24, 25, and I put my gold onto him, the gold of masculinity, strength, courage, and independence, things I had none of, and he had lots. Over the course of 40 years, I got my gold back. I didn't do it by way of guns. I've never shot a gun since. I was acutely aware of all this as I sat next to young Thor. Quote, I have gold for you, I said. Of course, it was his gold, or it wouldn't work. I couldn't give him anything, but I could carry his gold if he chose to allow me. And he did, because I'm more like him and he's more like me than either of us is like his grandfather. I've made my way in this world by a series of carriers of specific gold. With the aid of heroes, I've proceeded in the way an alpine climber hammers in his piton, secures his rope, pulls himself up, and gets hold of it. This is how we grow. Everyone comes to be where he or she is now to some extent through the exchange of gold. I thought when I read this section of the all of the sponsors, I had several in my first 20 years or so in recovery. I moved around a little bit, picked up a new sponsor. And the sponsor, I didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, I was looking for that father figure that I never had growing up. And I was looking for a man who could give me that energy, that sense of what it really means to be a man. It was much later in life that I went through a rites of passage and initiation ceremony thing that lasted several days, where I psychologically processed some of this. But I think that's what we do. And if you can be conscious of that in choosing a sponsor, in choosing a mate, in watching yourself closely as to what is going on, you'll really get to see what's happening at a deeper psychological level, and making conscious what is unconscious is really what recovery is all about. So, next little subsection. It's titled, Sometimes We Have to Struggle. Johnson says, when the exchange of gold proceeds well, we mature and eventually become strong enough to ask for our gold back. It might be awkward at first. We might have to slam the door as we exit to convince ourselves that we're leaving. We act in this kind of adolescent way, clumsy at retrieving our gold, because we don't really understand what's going on. Carrying someone's gold is a fine art and a high responsibility. Listen up, those who sponsor. If you're the recipient of someone's gold, hold it carefully and be prepared to give it back within a microsecond's notice. Unfortunately, There are people who collect gold and refuse to give it back. It's a kind of murder, Johnson says. They collect an entourage or followers and exploit them. It happened to me, and it was exceedingly painful, Johnson says. Well, I think it's probably happened to many of us that we when we come into the program, for gosh sakes, there's usually not much of me there. The me hasn't developed. The me got short-circuited in its growth. The me maybe stopped at 12 or 13 emotionally, and went deep into the underground. And now I'm acting unconsciously. And oftentimes you'll see this, an individual in a 12-step recovery program becomes the guru and has his or her followers. And as long as they're following, the guru is happy and pleased with you. But if you step out of line and you rebel and you dare to become your own self, look out. The wrath may well descend upon you. That's the unhealthy part of it. You know, you got to know, if you're sponsoring, that you're being for that person what they are unable to yet be for themselves. It's a tremendous responsibility, and it needs to be guarded, and you need to be guided in how you're handling it. Johnson says, my father didn't really father me, and so much of the fatherly gold in me was uninvested. I spent a good part of my early life looking for the father I never had. His dad was an alcoholic. One day when I was in my 20s, a man came into my life who seemed ideal for this investment of gold. He acted like a father and let it be known that he would carry the masculine archetype for me. I trusted him and was ready for a wise old man to guide me to the next stage of life. Here was someone in whose glory I could bask. I gave him my gold, and it was a wonderful experience for a few days. Within a week, he began manipulating and dominating me, organizing my life and using me. I could have stayed, and that would have been the price for storing my fatherly gold with him. But I already knew too much to allow him to keep it. So I asked for my gold back. He wouldn't return it. He wanted to continue the manipulation. I had to fight with him, not with blows, but psychologically. I fought my way out of his orbit, and there is still enmity between us. It was a bitter experience. Our culture understands little about these matters. So when we ask the other person for our gold back, he or she probably won't know what we're talking about. She might say, last week you were opening doors for me and treating me like a princess, and this week you're ignoring me. People don't understand the dynamics. It is only after you get your gold back that you can see the gold of the other person. When the time is right, when you're ready to bear the weight, you must get your gold back. If you can do it with dignity and tact, that's best. But you must get it back one way or another. One of the ways of processing some of these dynamics that are happening at the unconscious level is through the appreciation of myth, the participation in ritual, and in ceremony. That's what that rites of passage, initiation rites that people used to go through, particularly young boys, around 14, 13, 12, in that age range, cultures had ceremonies in which they were initiated, in which they became men. All right? Rites of passage, they were called. And what would happen is the old men in the village would come and take the boys into the woods, and there they would go through initiation rites. It would be painful. It would be difficult. They would approach death. Hopefully, most didn't die, or maybe very few died. But it was to let you know when you're growing up and turning that age and feeling like you're really hot stuff, that some old wise man needs to come along and tell you, you ain't so hot, kid. You need to be humble. And what happens, because we don't have those rites of passage anymore, is gangs happen, drugs happen, drunkenness happens, orgies happen. You know, there's no or damn few wise old men left to guide us, and so off we go, inflated, and having to crash. And hopefully when we crash, that's when we arrive at the program. And the program is intended to be a mechanism for growing up. Here's a pathway. And whether you're 18 or 27, like I was, or 52, it doesn't really matter, but it's time to grow up. It's time to find your gold inside of you, hey? And recognize it and harvest it, mine it, I guess a better way of saying it, manifest it, develop it. That's the God within. God's not out there in some distant planet. God's waiting inside of us, wanting us to mature, to respond, to evolve. Jung would say that just like physically our bodies have evolved over millions of years, so too do our psyches evolve, and there are patterns that are universal for people that we have to go through, and it's aiming towards maturity. It's aiming towards, Jung would call it individuation, to become the self you're always meant to be. It's like an acorn, you know. It isn't meant to be an acorn. It's meant to be an oak. And if it stays a damned acorn, it's going to be very frustrated. But if it will die to the clinging to its acornness, just like we die to the clinging of our ego, you see, a new center evolves. We have now gained access to the inner world, access to where the gold is being produced. A little bit on this ceremony process, and I think we'll save the rest for the next episode. Johnson says, it is possible to create a ceremony to mark the important occasion of returning someone's gold. A young man I was seeing in analysis gave me a large chunk of his gold. From the beginning, he'd compliment me every time we saw each other. I'd say, this is your value. You need to drape it around my neck for a while, but you're going to take it back eventually, using this language. He kept complimenting me, telling me how valuable I was to him, how lucky he was to have me as his therapist. You're talking about your own inner gold, I told him. He was an intelligent and powerful young man, a genius in his own right, and his gold was too heavy for him. He was desperate for someone to take it off his shoulders. So we discussed what was happening and the terms of the exchange, and he fully understood. This went on for almost 5 years. Then one day he said, "I want my gold back." I had noticed that he was getting restless, so I agreed. "Things are changing," I said. "Let's do a ceremony to put the gold back in your pocket." I conjured up a small piece of gold the size of a pea, and a few days later we had the ceremony. He held the kernel of gold, shaking, suddenly more aware of what he had been doing. Then he put it in my hands and said anxiously, "Suppose you don't give it back." I said, "Yes, suppose." I kept the gold for a while, held it in my hand, put it in my pocket, waited a bit, and produced it again. Then I ceremoniously put it back into his hands. And he was greatly relieved. I said, "This is your gold, and it belongs only in your pocket. I am honored that you would allow me to hold it for you all those years. But it's yours, and now it needs to go back to you." It was a profound moment, a coming of age. I had paved the way for returning it when the time was right. Being clear about what is taking place and what is the desired outcome can be very helpful. It didn't actually go this easily. The next day, he had his gold all over me again. He couldn't hold it and wanted me to take it back. The exchange of gold is not entirely a voluntary matter. Sometimes it takes a few round trips. We traded the gold back and forth several more times until one day he could withstand it. Since then, I haven't heard any more about his wanting it back. We need people along the way who can perform this function for us because we can't perform it for ourselves. We need a sponsor. We need a therapist. We need an individual upon whom we can invest our gold, give them this to carry it for us until we are able to carry it ourselves. I had a sponsor in Detroit many years ago who it was in reading this book by Johnson that I understood the inner dynamics of what was happening within our relationship. He controlled people. He was a sick man. He was a brilliant man, but he was a sick man. And I had to break free from him. I had to do it not violently, but I had to cut the cord, move away. And he would use people. For some reason, he didn't seem to use me other than in perhaps this manner. And it was really hard. I see a lot of this stuff happening in our programs, and I'm so grateful to have had that experience. I went to another guy who was in the program, and he helped me through that. He helped me through that situation because he knew the man, and he knew this. The second man I talk about here was a hell of a lot wiser. He said, "No, you need to go. You need to break free." And then this fellow's name was Floyd. He became my sponsor for many years. He carried that gold for me, and he told me in the beginning of our journey together that you'll come to a time in your life when you'll outgrow your need for a sponsor. I say that sometimes, and I get a lot of blowback in the 12-step world. But this is what was told to me by one of my earliest sponsors, that you'll outgrow your need for me, that the reliance, the dependence needs to go inside, if you're 20, 30 years in recovery and I desperately need a meeting. I desperately need to get in touch with my sponsor. Something hasn't happened. Some growing up has not occurred. Some inner gold is still being projected out there. And that's costly. That's costly. So we're going to continue this in the next episode. I hope the reading of Johnson is helpful. He says it so much better than I could ever say it, or perhaps even having a guest on to banter back and forth on it. What I would encourage you to do, though, is if this brings up questions or comments for you, shoot them to me in an email. You can write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com. I think at the last episode, I'd like to kind of go through those and share some experience, strength, and hope coming from out there. So it's about all I got for now. The book, Robert Johnson, Inner Gold. Buy it. I think you'll really benefit from it. And thank you for listening. And I will look forward to seeing you next time. God bless. Keep coming back.